Morning, everyone. And at the outset, I thank Dr. Kavita, Dr. Venkatesh, and the entire Pondicherry Arvind team for having me here. It's a very interesting talks I have heard. And so let me add to the anterior anomalies here. So I will be talking about the anterior anomalies which cause posterior perils. The posterior peril being glaucoma, just to clarify. So before that, we just look at the childhood glaucoma, how it's different from adult glaucoma. The CGRN has given a different definition so that we can standardize the definition across the world. That is IOP of more than 21 or the investigator's discretion, that is usually even more than 15 to 16 because of the effects of anesthesia, or even the normal IOP in the children. More than that would be considered glaucoma. Any of these two criteria can be present, either optic disc changes, which is progressive increase in the cup disc ratio, or a cup disc ratio of 0.3 or more. You should always look at the corneal findings, either the size or the presence of Habs stria, progressive myopia, myopic shift or increase in axial length, and in older children, reproducible visual field defect consistent with glaucomatous optic neuropathy. So similarly, the CGRN has also given a classification of childhood glaucoma to standardize it across the world. And what we'll be looking at is this part of it, which is the associated with non-acquired ocular anomalies with or without systemic conditions. So let's look at anterior segment dysgenesis. It's a spectrum of disorders which involve malformations in the anterior segment of the eye, the cornea, iris, anterior chamber, lens, and ciliary body. Because of this disrupted anatomical relationship in the anterior segment structures, there is an altered aqueous humor flow resulting in elevated IOP and subsequent development of glaucoma. Now, what is interesting is that they have multiple phenotypes which are complex and sometimes may even overlap, and you cannot put it in one category. And the clinical presentations may range from very subtle to clinically obvious. So we have both disorders which are with non-acquired ocular anomalies and those which have additional systemic conditions. Many of them are genetic in nature. And once you have anterior segment dysgenesis, glaucoma or not glaucoma, normal IOP or high IOP, they need a lifelong follow-up, as it definitely increases the risk of having glaucoma in the future. So this, I'm sure everyone can recognize here. So this is congenital aniridia. I'm starting a little unconventionally here. So this is presence of iris hypoplasia along with angle dysgenesis. The iris hypoplasia can be complete or partial aniridia can also be present, and it's due to the mutation of the PAX6 gene at the chromosome 11p13. It's like a mother of all genes governing a lot of other functions of the eye. So glaucoma can affect 50 to 70%. Inheritance is autosomal dominant with high penetrance, and it's variable. Now, if a child has sporadic aniridia, which is seen in 30% cases, you should always look out for associated Wilms tumor or nephroblastoma, and the child needs screening. There may be genitourinary abnormalities, mental retardation related to large deletion of the adjoining locus. An autosomal recessive form may also be present, and multiple syndromes are associated with aniridia. There's another distinct phenotype of partial aniridia, which has ectropia on UVA, central keratopathy, which is autosomal recessive CYP1B1. Along with that, other mutations may also be present. So these are other features. Apart from affecting the angle and the iris, other structures of the eye are also affected. Here you can see limbal stem cell deficiency. So this eye had actually undergone an external trap plus trap. IOP was excellently controlled. However, the cornea remains like this. This is a cataract, same eye, and this is foveal hypoplasia. Additionally, optic disc hypoplasia can also be present. So how does glaucoma occur in these eyes when there is no iris? So there is always a stump of iris which remains. There may be associated angle dysgenesis. And progressively, the stump of rudimentary iris can also rotate over a period of time to cause angle closure. Additionally, absence of Schlemm's canal is also seen in some cases. So here you can see a UBM where you can see this how the stump is rotating here. And here there is partial aniridia, but you can see how it is adherent to the cornea. So management, now in all these glaucomas, additionally, we do start with, initially we do start with medical management. However, they may need early surgery. only goniotomy or any angle surgery may not be as successful in these eyes, but still is attempted. This is another case. The other eye of the patient with the limbal stem cell deficiency was PAX6 positive, and this was post external trap plus trap, where the cornea cleared beautifully and the disc was also healthy. So for one eye, the patient was good. The other eye had a limbal stem cell deficiency. This is another child, a 7-year-old with sporadic aniridia with lens opacities, a high IOP, who underwent TRAB and is doing well. So we know that in sporadic aniridia, we need to screen the child for Wilms tumor as per the guidelines. So can anybody identify what is like? Oh, I already have the answer there. So this is an aniridia IOL. So this actually is a patient who had glaucoma, disc cupping, and aniridia, and was put on, underwent a cataract surgery with these IOLs, and the pressure was still high. So these IOLs actually are not recommended even by the World Glaucoma Association because they are very bulky and cause progressive closure of the angle. So we had to do a AGV in the left eye and later on planned for a corneal procedure. Otherwise, AGV, the outcome is quite successful in these eyes. Another condition which I came across is the progressive anterior fibrosis syndrome in these eyes. I've not seen one, but I did come across in the literature where after multiple surgeries, they develop a retrocorneal or retrolenticular membranes arising from the rudimentary iris and causing progressive anterior displacement of the IOL, corneal decompensation, and angle closure. So coming to the Axenfeld-Rieger anomaly. So this is actually now considered as a spectrum of disease, not alone Axenfeld or Rieger, as the presentations vary over a wide spectrum. Of course, Axenfeld is when the posterior embryotoxin is present, and Rieger is when the iris abnormalities are present. But now it is usually considered as a spectrum. So the presentations can be very variable. They may be just a subtle peaking of the pupil and a change in the iris pattern to these atrophic patterns here. This is again a very subtle pattern. If you want to look at it carefully, you might pick it up. Otherwise, if you see the patient after dilation, you may actually miss this. And the point which clinches a diagnosis here is the gonioscopy. So you cannot diagnose Axenfeld-Rieger without doing a gonioscopy. And gonioscopy shows a variety of presentations. You can see these long iris process going up to the shawl base line and a prominent shawl base line, then progressive synechia formation, which are broad. And you may even see findings as subtle as this, which would give you a hint of presence of Axenfeld-Rieger's. So this we have already discussed. So additionally, in the Axenfeld-Rieger syndrome, the patient may have systemic features like hypertelorism, microdontia, hyperdontia, cardiac anomalies, umbilical skin tags, hernia, and hypospedia, spectus excavatum, empty cella syndrome, mental retardation, and growth hormone deficiencies. Risk of glaucoma is up to 50%. And again, the mechanism of glaucoma is the anterior the angle dysgenesis. Usually it occurs in childhood or young adulthood, but may present even in infancy. And when it does, it will lead to the corneal enlargement and the usual changes which occur when the pressure increases in infancy. So again, the inheritance, again, multiple genes are involved. And what is important here is a comprehensive eye examination of the family member to clinch the phenotype. So just a few days back, I had in fact, yesterday I was operating a patient who was referred as primary congenital glaucoma. But when we took up the patient, we saw that the patient had syndactyly in both the hands. And also when you start operating and do the gonioscopy, you realize there's a subtle posterior embryotoxin. It was a unilateral glaucoma. So I think the next step for me would be to examine the parents of the child and also go for a genetic analysis. So it just changes your diagnosis. So this is another eye post-trap. And this is a young lawyer actually with low vision, one-eyed, and post-AGV because there was a failed trap. And I think the next year would be he will need a cataract surgery and his specular count is very low. So next we come on to the Peters anomaly. This was described by Dr. Peter, a German ophthalmologist. Here you have what additional feature you have here is the changes in the cornea. That is underlying defects in the stroma, the Descemet membrane, and the endothelium. again, in all these conditions, I think all the PGs can remember the magic number 50%. That's what is given in all literature, that the risk of glaucoma is about 50%. And this can again be sporadic. Multiple genes are involved depending on which type of Peters it is. And this one occurs more in infancy, but can occur later also. So this is a Peters type 1, where only you have central corneal opacity and iridocorneal adhesions. In Peters type 2, you have corneal lenticular adhesions, and in Peters plus, you have additional systemic features like cleft palate, cleft lip, short stature, abnormal ears, and mental retardation, as you can see in this child. And here you can see how the ASOCT is beautifully helping us in looking at the anatomy of the anterior segment and then planning our management. So this is another article from where I got the three types, Peters 1, 2, and 3, where you can see the iris adhesions and the iridolenticular adhesions, and third is the UBM. So here the management is ASOCT and UBM are crucial for management in these kind of eyes, because once we can image the anterior segment, we can plan our further surgical or medical management. The challenges are here that the cornea is not clear. So IOP measurement cannot be done in the central cornea. You will need to find parts of clear cornea where you can measure the IOP. The optic disc may not be visible. Even the angle may not be visible via gonioscopy. You may have to resort to imaging. And there may be all these adhesions, and thus very difficult to do angle surgery. You might end up doing a trabeculectomy, GDDs, along with a lensectomy. This is one child. This is again not a classical profile. You can see has a bit of ectropia and uvea here. The central corneal opacity is also there. And also cataract was there, and the OCT was actually of this eye, which I had shown earlier. And what this child underwent was lensectomy. And we had put him on dilating drops so that the pupil dilates beyond the corneal opacity. And with this, the child is able to actually maintain the ambulatory vision. So here the visual rehabilitation is very important. You need pupillary dilation. You may just go in for an optical iridectomy. You may need to combine with a cataract surgery. Penetrating keratoplasty may be required, but the success rate in these eyes may not be very great. So this, we have touched upon this earlier. This is another congenital ectropia on UVA, which has been discussed in the previous lectures. So this is a rare, non-progressive, but sometimes may progress, as we saw earlier. The iris pigment epithelium is present on the anterior iris surface. It is unilateral, but even bilateral cases have been reported. We too have seen bilateral cases. It is more common in the second decade and can be associated with ipsilateral blepharotosis, Rieger syndrome, Prader-Willi, and neurofibromatosis 1. So the size and extent to which the pupillary circumference is involved is variable, but it ends short of the angle. There is hyperplasia of the posterior pigment epithelium and may be associated with angle dysgenesis. Now, the younger children who present with CU usually have a better prognosis than those presenting at birth. So the neonatal onset is associated with possibly CYP1B1 gene, has iris hypoplasia, and a very severe disease. And it has been reported by Dr. Sushmita's group from PGI. So this is our results. We have actually found good results with trabeculectomy in these eyes. So this again is congenital ectropia on UVA, but it has something else also. If you can see this fleshy mass, this is actually a patient with neurofibromatosis. Of course, it has been touched upon in the previous lecture, but this again, patient had undergone lid debulking procedure and also had a mass on the sclera, episclera. And if you can see here, it has also gone into the angle. Luckily, the IOP of this patient is normal. Disc is normal, probably because only part of the angle is involved. But again, it does need a lifelong monitoring and is can develop high IOP in the future. Anybody wants to guess what is this? So you see the silvery color, bluish color of the eyes, and absolutely nothing beyond the cornea. So this is actually congenital primary aphakia, and it is a rare this is my last slide almost. So it's a rare dysgenesis where actually the lens is not developed. And since the lens is not developed, it's crucial for the development of the remaining part of the angle in the eye. And usually a FOXC3 homozygous mutation is seen. A B-scan and UBM are essential for the diagnosis. And these cases don't do very well with surgery, or so a limited diode has been recommended. I think this has already been touched upon. The only thing I'd like to highlight is in the younger children, they may have associated angle dysgenesis. So again, you should manage accordingly. And another thing, which is congenital rubella syndrome, although it's an infection, it's been included by the CGRN in this category because the virus arrests the development of the angle. And then you also have, again, corneal as well as lenticular abnormalities in these eyes. So they are, again, very hard to treat. So the management, to summarize, needs a careful systemic evaluation, not only by us, but also by a pediatrician, screening of the family members, genetic testing, and good to measure the axial length. You can use this nomogram, and coordination between the primary care providers, pediatric ophthalmologists, geneticists, anesthetists, and counselors, LVA, amblyopia management. It goes a long way, and it's a tough journey, but very rewarding. Thank you.